The silence struck General Fritz Bayerlein as more threatening than any bombardment. Through his field glasses on that July morning in 1944, the commander of Panzer Lehr Division watched the American positions west of St. Lo at 0937 hours, noting that their artillery had ceased its relentless harassment. His veterans, hardened survivors from Rommel's African campaigns, held defensive positions along the St. Lo-Perrier road. These men had weathered Soviet artillery storms that seemed capable of splitting the earth. They had survived the British guns at El Alamein, yet nothing in their collective combat experience would prepare them for what occurred at precisely 9:38 hours. More than 1,000 American artillery pieces discharged simultaneously at that moment. The bombardment didn't unfold as a rolling barrage or sequential fire as military tradition had dictated for generations. Instead, every gun fired at once. Projectiles launched from varying distances, some batteries positioned 6 miles distant, others 15 miles away, had been meticulously calculated to impact their targets in the same instant. The barrage combined light 105mm howitzers with medium 155mm guns, heavy 8-inch howitzers, and massive 240mm batteries, all converging in a single catastrophic moment. Artillery officers from any previous conflict would have deemed the mathematical precision necessary for such an achievement impossible. Each battery had computed not merely range and deflection, but precise time of flight. A 105mm shell fired at high angle might require 23 seconds to reach its destination. A 155mm long tom, firing from greater distance, could need 31 seconds. Fire commands had been staggered backward from the intended moment of impact, with each battery discharging at the exactly calculated second to guarantee simultaneous arrival. German defenders were about to encounter something beyond a simple artillery barrage. This represented a demonstration of American industrial coordination and mathematical science applied to warfare, a fusion of technology, communications, and organizational capacity that would demolish not only German defensive works, but their entire comprehension of modern combat. Understanding the revolutionary character of time-on-target techniques requires first grasping artillery doctrine as it existed in 1944. Artillery had followed predictable patterns through centuries of warfare. Napoleon massed his grand batteries to fire in succession. The Great War introduced rolling barrages that advanced ahead of infantry at predetermined speeds. German forces had perfected their doctrine of concentrated firepower, Schwerpunkt, focusing overwhelming artillery strength at decisive points. German artillery doctrine, refined through victories across Poland, France, and the early Russian campaigns, emphasized swift concentration and rapid displacement. German forward observers, operating in close coordination with battery commanders, could deliver accurate fire within minutes of target identification. The Wehrmacht took pride in this flexibility and responsiveness. German assessments of their artillery superiority weren't entirely misplaced based on conventional measures. Their observers were skilled, their gunners experienced, their doctrine proven in multiple campaigns. However, they had overlooked something fundamental. The Americans were learning, adapting, and applying principles of industrial management to artillery's ancient practice. Time-on-target development represented a fundamental transformation in military thinking. Rather than conceiving artillery as individual batteries supporting nearby units, American planners envisioned artillery as an integrated system, a coordinated network capable of delivering crushing force at precise moments. Executing time-on-target barrages demanded 4 interconnected technological and organizational innovations that German forces hadn't fully comprehended. The forward observer system came first. Unlike German forward observers who typically worked with individual batteries, American observers could summon entire artillery groups, even corps-level assets. Each observer carried SCR-619 radios, later upgraded to SCR-610 models, providing reliable communication to fire direction centers positioned miles behind front lines. The SCR-619, detailed in Technical Manual 11-619 from April 1945, operated on FM frequencies between 27 and 3738.9 MHz. The SCR-610, standardized September 29, 1941, delivered 20 to 32 watts output with dependable 5-mile range. Fire direction centers constituted the second innovation, a concept pioneered at Fort Sill during the 1930s and perfected through combat. The FDC functioned essentially as a mathematical computation center where trained personnel employed firing tables, slide rules, and graphical firing boards to calculate firing solutions for multiple batteries simultaneously. Communication infrastructure formed the third element. Americans laid telephone wire with nearly obsessive intensity. A single infantry division might string 3,000 miles of wire during 1 month of combat operations. These redundant communication networks ensured fire missions could be transmitted instantly to dozens of batteries. Standardization, the fourth and most underestimated element, proved crucial. American ammunition was manufactured to exacting specifications in factories stretching from Pennsylvania to California. Any 105mm shell fired from any howitzer would exhibit predictable ballistic characteristics. German ammunition, increasingly produced by slave labor in dispersed facilities, lacked such consistency. German forces first encountered limited time-on-target techniques during early 1944 Italian operations, though many dismissed these as fortunate coincidences rather than deliberate tactics. The concentrated firepower achieved during the Anzio breakout on May 23, 1944, provided the first large-scale demonstration that captured German attention. 16 artillery battalions, over 200 guns, delivered coordinated fire on German positions along the Caesar Line. The technique had been refined through months of practice. The 9th Infantry Division conducted experimental TOT barrages in Sicily. The 1st Infantry Division improved the technique in Italy. By D-Day, TOT was becoming standard doctrine, though German intelligence dismissed early reports as exaggeration. Operation Cobra's launch on July 25, 1944, fully unveiled American time-on-target capabilities. General Omar Bradley had concentrated the largest artillery force yet assembled by the U.S. Army in Europe. Over 1,000 tubes ranging from 105mm howitzers to 8-inch guns participated, with 522 guns from 7th and 8th Corps alone, supplemented by 4.2-inch mortars and tank destroyers firing in artillery rolls. The target area, a rectangle approximately 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep south of the Saint-Lô-Perrier Road, contained the bulk of Panzer Lehr Division and elements of the 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, roughly 5,000 combat troops in fortified positions. At 0938, following carpet bombing by heavy bombers that had already stunned defenders, every American gun fired. Shells launched from distances ranging from 5,000 to 25,000 yards converged on their targets in a coordinated moment of destruction. The U.S. Army had allocated 170,000 artillery shells for Operation Cobra, 140,000 for 7th Corps and 27,000 for 8th Corps, representing a staggering concentration of firepower. The barrage continued in precise intervals, successive time-on-target concentrations walking through German positions. Then silence fell. Then American infantry advanced. Panzer Lehr, which had entered Normandy with 14,000 men and 190 tanks, essentially ceased existing as a coherent division. General Fritz Bayerlein reported to Field Marshal von Kluge his assessment that became legendary. "My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numbed." German forces couldn't fully comprehend the mathematical precision underlying time on target. This wasn't simply massing many guns. It involved solving complex ballistic equations in real time. Consider the problem's complexity. Making shells from different guns arrive together required knowing each battery's exact location, precise distance to target, muzzle velocity of each gun type, weight and aerodynamic characteristics of each shell type, wind speed and direction at various altitudes, air temperature and density, Earth's rotation for long-range fire, and powder temperature affecting muzzle velocity. Americans had developed graphical computation tools, the graphical firing table and graphical sight table, that enabled rapid calculation of these complex problems. German artillery, still relying on conventional firing tables and individual battery calculations, couldn't match this speed. Time-on-target execution depended on communications networks that dwarfed anything Germans had encountered. By July 1944, a typical American infantry division in Normandy operated more radio sets than an entire German corps possessed in 1940. The 1st Infantry Division alone operated over 900 radio sets by August 1944. Every artillery battery maintained multiple redundant communication systems: wire, radio, and messenger. Fire direction centers maintained direct lines to every battery, every forward observer, and higher headquarters. This communications superiority enabled something Germans found almost incomprehensible: the ability to mass dispersed artillery instantly. American batteries didn't need physical concentration to achieve concentrated effect. Guns spread across 20 miles of front could deliver their shells to a single point simultaneously. German officers slowly began understanding that time on target represented not merely tactical innovation, but a manifestation of American industrial and organizational capability applied to warfare. The standardization that made TOT possible extended throughout American military production. Every 105mm howitzer, whether manufactured by Rock Island Arsenal or Watervliet Arsenal, possessed identical ballistic characteristics. Every shell, whether produced in Pennsylvania or Missouri, met exact specifications. This standardization, achieved through mass production techniques, enabled the precise calculations TOT required. German production, increasingly disrupted by bombing and reliant on dispersed manufacturing using slave labor, couldn't achieve such consistency. The American capacity for mass-producing trained personnel, not just weapons, astounded German professionals. The U.S. Army's Fire Direction Center training program at Fort Sill graduated thousands of qualified FDC personnel throughout the war. The German counter-offensive at Mortain, launched August 7, 1944, provided devastating demonstration of American TOT capabilities in defensive operations. Hitler had ordered massive counterattack to sever the American breakthrough, committing rebuilt 2nd SS Panzer Division, 1st SS Panzer Division, and 116th Panzer Division. As German armor concentrated for attack, American forward observers watched from Hill 317. When the German assault began at midnight, they called TOT missions on pre-registered coordinates. The 2nd Infantry Division alone fired up to 20 TOTS nightly, according to official after-action reports. The American 30th Infantry Division, though outnumbered, called TOT missions from 7 separate artillery battalions throughout the night. Each mission delivered instantaneous devastation on German assembly areas, approach routes, and command posts. Concentrated firepower created what German survivors described as solid walls of hot steel that made advance impossible. By dawn, the German attack had stalled. Field Marshal von Kluge reported to Hitler that continuing the offensive was impossible against such artillery superiority. Routinely executing TOT missions represented remarkable training achievement. The U.S. Army had transformed millions of civilians into skilled practitioners of complex military science in under 3 years. At Fort Sill, the Field Artillery School developed intensive programs that compressed decades of artillery science into 17 weeks. Students learned ballistics, meteorology, survey techniques, and communications. Most importantly, they learned conceiving artillery as integrated system rather than individual guns. Training emphasized practical application over theory. Students performed thousands of simulated fire missions, calculating TOT solutions until the process became automatic. By graduation, a competent FDC team could calculate a 10-battery TOT mission in under 180 seconds. This mass production of technical expertise astounded German professionals who encountered it. Americans trained more fire direction specialists in 3 years than Germany had produced in decades, approaching military education like factory production, standardized, efficient, scalable. Executing time on target required not just skill, but overwhelming material resources. A single TOT mission might expend more ammunition than a German division received monthly. During Operation Cobra alone, American artillery fired over 170,000 rounds. The logistical system delivered thousands of tons of ammunition daily to the front. Trucks ran continuously from Normandy beaches to batteries, creating an unbroken supply chain. American ammunition quality also surpassed German expectations. Each shell was manufactured to exacting tolerances with consistent propellant quality and precise weight distribution. This standardization enabled the accurate time-of-flight calculations essential for TOT. German ammunition, by contrast, showed increasing variability as production dispersed and quality control deteriorated. German artillery officers had to test-fire new ammunition batches to determine actual velocity and range, while Americans could assume their shells would perform exactly to specification. One aspect of time on target that particularly impressed German artillery officers was American mastery of meteorological effects on ballistics. Accurate TOT required precise knowledge of wind speeds at various altitudes, air pressure, temperature, and humidity. Americans had deployed extensive meteorological service. Every corps maintained weather sections, taking readings every 30 minutes. Radiosonde weather balloons with radio transmitters provided atmospheric data up to 30,000 feet. This information was immediately distributed to all fire direction centers. This attention to atmospheric conditions enabled American artillery to maintain accuracy even in rapidly changing weather. During the November offensive in Hürtgen Forest, American TOT missions maintained precision despite fog, rain, and variable winds that would have disrupted German artillery. The Battle of Hürtgen Forest demonstrated that time on target could devastate even in dense woodland Germans had considered artillery-proof. Americans developed tree-burst TOT missions, timing shells to detonate in forest canopy. In November 1944, the 4th Infantry Division attacking through the forest called TOT missions, using mixtures of high-explosive and white phosphorus shells. Coordinated tree bursts created what survivors described as instant hell, wood splinters driven downward like spears, mixed with burning phosphorus that ignited the forest floor. The 28th Infantry Division, attacking toward Schmidt, used TOT barrages to clear German strongpoints in woods. One concentrated mission on November 6th involved 12 battalions firing into a 500-metre square area, delivering over 3,000 shells in 30 seconds. German positions that had held for weeks were obliterated in half a minute. Dense woods muffled sound, so shells arrived with even less warning than in open terrain. German medical services documented unprecedented rates of what they termed artillery-induced trauma among Hürtgen veterans, soldiers who remained functional after conventional bombardments but were psychologically broken by coordinated devastation of TOT in the forest. The encirclement of German forces in the Falaise Pocket during August 1944 provided the most concentrated demonstration of time-on-target effectiveness. As German units struggled escaping through the narrowing gap, American artillery delivered continuous TOT missions on escape routes. On August 17th alone, American artillery executed documented TOT missions on the Falaise-Argenton Road at 30-minute intervals throughout daylight hours. Each mission involved 10 to 15 batteries, delivering coordinated devastation on German columns attempting to flee. General Hans Eberbach, commanding remnants of Panzer Group West, reported that concentrated artillery fire was so intense that bringing up reserves or evacuating wounded became impossible. Vehicle movement became suicide. The road through Falaise became known as the Corridor of Death. Destroyed vehicles, dead horses, and abandoned equipment created obstacles that slowed movement, making subsequent units even more vulnerable to TOT strikes. By August 21st, when the pocket finally closed, 50,000 German soldiers had been captured and 10,000 killed, with artillery accounting for the majority of casualties. As German forces retreated toward the Seine in late August, they discovered even river crossings offered no respite from TOT barrages. American forward observers had infiltrated ahead of main forces, establishing positions overlooking every potential crossing site. At Vernon, Rouen, and Mantes, German attempts to establish pontoon bridges met immediate TOT responses. The precision was such that bridges were destroyed while still under construction, often with engineer units still working on them. Systematic destruction of crossing attempts through precisely timed artillery demonstrated the technique's flexibility. Units began refusing daylight crossings, creating massive traffic jams on western banks that became targets for additional TOT missions. By December 1944, Americans had integrated new technologies, making time on target even more devastating. The VT variable time fuse, known as the proximity fuse, was first used in ground artillery during the Battle of the Bulge. These fuses detonated shells at optimal height above ground for maximum fragment dispersion. When VT-fused shells were incorporated into TOT barrages from December 1944 onward, lethality increased dramatically. Shells detonating at optimal height created uniform destruction patterns that no foxhole or slit trench could protect against. Over 22 million proximity fuses were produced during the war, transforming artillery effectiveness in the conflict's final months. Germans initially believed Americans had developed a new weapon type. Intelligence reports speculated about controlled aerial mines or time-delay cluster munitions. The truth? That it was simply precise timing combined with proximity fuses seemed too simple for such devastating effect. As American forces approached the Siegfried Line in September 1944, German commanders believed their fortifications would finally provide protection from TOT barrages. Concrete bunkers and steel cupolas had been designed to withstand sustained artillery bombardment. Americans developed specialized TOT missions for attacking fortifications. By combining instant impact high-explosive shells with delayed fuse armor-piercing projectiles, they achieved surface explosions and penetrating impacts in unified strikes. At Geilenkirchen in November, the 84th Infantry Division faced extensive Siegfried Line fortifications. Attacking units called for TOT missions from 12 battalions, 144 guns, firing ammunition-type mixtures. During the German Ardennes offensive in December 1944, time on target proved its defensive value. Though initially caught off guard, American artillery units quickly recovered and began delivering TOT missions on German spearheads. On December 19th, as the 2nd Panzer Division approached Dinant, forward observers from the 3rd Armoured Division called for emergency TOT support. Within 4 minutes, 8 battalions had calculated firing solutions. The resulting barrage caught the German column in march formation, destroying the lead battalion within 60 seconds. The ability to mass fires quickly through TOT proved crucial in containing German penetrations. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces called TOT missions danger close to their own positions, devastating German assault formations attempting to breach the perimeter. As American forces approached the Rhine in March 1945, time on target reached its zenith of destructive capability. Crossing operations were supported by massive artillery concentrations using TOT principles. At the Wesel crossing on March 24, 1945, the Allies concentrated 4,000 guns, with 2,070 American pieces participating. The opening bombardment lasted 4 hours, with coordinated TOT strikes at 15-minute intervals. Each strike involved hundreds of guns, achieving unified impact across kilometre-wide target areas. The scale was unprecedented. In preparation for the crossing, American artillery fired over 65,000 tons of ammunition in March 1945 alone. German defenders reported bombardment so intense that concussion alone caused casualties, with soldiers found dead without visible wounds. At Oppenheim, where Patton's Third Army crossed on March 22nd, the supporting TOT barrage involved 33 battalions, over 400 guns, firing in perfect coordination. The barrage lasted 60 seconds and delivered 10,000 shells onto German positions. German commanders reported entire battalions annihilated with no survivors to even report what had happened. German officers gradually recognized that time on target represented application of American industrial methods to warfare. The same principles enabling Detroit to produce a bomber every hour enabled American artillery to coordinate hundreds of guns. This industrial approach extended beyond the battlefield. American factories produced artillery shells in staggering quantities, over 8 million rounds monthly by late 1944. The transportation system delivered these shells from ports to firing batteries in continuous flow. Communication networks coordinated this vast enterprise with business-like efficiency. The psychological trauma inflicted by time on target extended far beyond immediate casualties. German medical services documented unprecedented rates of combat neurosis, specifically linked to coordinated bombardment. Veterans who had endured hours-long Soviet barrages on the Eastern Front were broken by 30-second TOT bombardments. The instantaneous nature removed all psychological coping mechanisms soldiers had developed. There was no escalation to prepare mentally, no rhythm to anticipate, no pattern to recognize. German field hospitals noted soldiers experiencing multiple TOT barrages exhibited unique symptoms: paralysis triggered by sudden sounds, inability to process multiple stimuli, profound fear of synchronicity itself. Unlike traditional shell shock, which might improve with rest, these symptoms persisted even after evacuation to rear areas. Fritz Bayerlein's assessment became the most quoted German description. "My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numbed." General Hans Eberbach provided crucial testimony. The fire curtain was so dense that bringing up reserves or evacuating wounded was impossible. The Americans have developed a system of artillery concentration exceeding anything we imagined. Captured documents from Wehrmacht headquarters revealed desperate attempts to counter American TOT capabilities. A weapons testing office report concluded that American coordinated fire technique represented technological superiority in computational devices and communication integration, with no effective countermeasure existing within current German capabilities. German attempts to replicate TOT techniques revealed systemic disadvantages. They understood the mathematics and could calculate time of flight, but lacked everything else: standardized ammunition, reliable communications, trained personnel, and the industrial foundation making American coordinated fire possible. German attempts at coordinated fire typically involved no more than 3 or 4 batteries and achieved only approximate simultaneity. The largest German attempt during the Nordwind offensive in January 1945 involved 8 batteries, but achieved impact dispersion over 12 seconds, far from American precision. As American forces drove into Germany in early 1945, time-on-target barrages became routine preliminaries to any attack. At Cologne, the garrison commander surrendered after experiencing a single 60-second TOT barrage on March 5th, reporting that further resistance was militarily pointless against such artillery superiority. The pattern repeated across the collapsing Reich. Commanders who had fought tenaciously for years capitulated after brief TOT bombardments. The psychological effect had become so pronounced that often the mere threat of coordinated fire prompted surrender. Soviet observers studied American time-on-target techniques with intense interest. The British, despite being allies, were equally impressed. Field Marshal Montgomery wrote in his memoirs that American time-on-target demonstrated warfare had become a matter of industrial and organizational superiority, with traditional military virtues, courage, discipline, tactical skill, becoming secondary to systematic application of overwhelming firepower. The German experience fundamentally influenced post-war military thinking. When the Bundeswehr was established in 1955, coordinated fires capability became a primary requirement for its artillery force, explicitly citing wartime experience with American TOT. The French École de Guerre revised its artillery curriculum based on German accounts. The Israeli Defense Forces, established in 1948, incorporated TOT principles from the beginning, advised by Jewish American veterans who had served in artillery units. NATO doctrine explicitly incorporated TOT principles, viewing coordinated fires as essential for defeating numerically superior Warsaw Pact forces. General Johannes Steinhoff, Luftwaffe fighter ace who later served as NATO Military Committee chairman, stated in 1968 that the lesson of American time on target was clear. Qualitative superiority in synchronization and coordination could defeat quantitative superiority in men and equipment. The computational methods developed for time on target laid groundwork for modern military technologies. The graphical firing tables and rapid calculation methods pioneered by American artillery units presaged computerized fire control systems. German forces encountering American time-on-target artillery marked a pivotal moment in military history, the transformation of warfare from an art practiced by warriors into a science executed by systems. German soldiers, products of the world's most professional military tradition, found themselves overwhelmed not by superior soldiers, but by superior systems. The thunder that arrived without warning in Normandy represented more than American firepower. It embodied the emergence of a new form of warfare, where victory belonged to those who could best organize and apply industrial power to military problems. The German Wehrmacht was defeated not by better soldiers, but by better systems, not by superior courage, but by superior coordination, not by tactical brilliance, but by industrial efficiency applied with mathematical precision to artillery's ancient art. American time on target shattered the entire conceptual framework of traditional military thinking. The coordinated thunder that fell on German positions in 1944–45 announced the arrival of a new age in warfare, where victory would belong to those who could best transform military operations into industrial processes. The echoes of that thunder still resonate in military doctrine worldwide. Every modern artillery system, every networked military force, every coordinated military operation owes something to the revolution that American time on target represented. The German soldiers who experienced it were witnesses to the birth of a new age in human conflict, where industrial mathematics would prove more powerful than martial tradition. In the age of industrial warfare, organization triumphs over courage, systems defeat soldiers, and coordinated time conquers all. The Germans learned this lesson under the instant, overwhelming thunder. American industrial warfare made manifest in perfectly coordinated artillery fire, a lesson that transformed warfare forever.